Before moving on to the story, don't forget to subscribe and like. Have a nice listening time. I work as an Uber driver in a quiet town. It was supposed to be an ordinary night, but things took a sinister turn with my last passenger. It was just after midnight when my phone buzzed with a ride request. The pickup was on the outskirts of town, at an old, decrepit house that looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. I arrived to find a man waiting in the dim light of the porch. He was tall, wearing a long coat, and had an unsettling presence. "Thank you for coming," he said in a low voice as he got into the back seat. His tone was polite, but there was something off about him. I tried to shake off the feeling and started driving. The night was eerily quiet, with only the hum of the engine breaking the silence. After a few minutes, the man spoke. "Have you ever wondered what happens to people who vanish without a trace?" he asked. I glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "No, not really. Why do you ask?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out a small, worn book and began flipping through it. The pages were filled with strange symbols and faded handwriting. As we drove further into the woods, the trees became thicker, and the darkness seemed to envelop the car. The GPS signal was lost, and my phone started to glitch. The man's presence became more oppressive, and an unsettling chill filled the car. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man's eyes, which had been hidden behind dark sunglasses, suddenly locked onto mine through the mirror. "Just a little further," he replied. Panic set in as I saw no signs of civilization. The road ahead was blocked by a large fallen tree. I slowed to a stop, trying to turn the car around, but the man suddenly gripped the back of my seat. "I wouldn't try that if I were you," he said, his voice now dripping with menace. I turned to face him, but he was gone. In his place was a chilling, dark figure that seemed to merge with the shadows of the car. My heart raced as I scrambled to get out, but the doors were locked. I tried to call for help, but my phone was dead. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the figure's hollow eyes staring at me, and the man's voice echoing in my ears. "No one escapes the shadows." When I woke up, the car was parked on a deserted road, and the man was nowhere to be found. My phone was back to normal, and the GPS had a new destination saved, a cemetery on the outskirts of town. The police never found any trace of the man, and they thought I was hallucinating. But every night since, I hear whispers in the dark, and the GPS on my phone still shows the cemetery as my final destination. I had recently moved to a small, isolated town for a fresh start. The cabin I rented was on the outskirts, surrounded by dense woods. The area seemed perfect for a peaceful retreat, away from the hustle and bustle of city life. One chilly autumn evening, I received a call from a friend in town. He mentioned an old legend about a cabin similar to mine, where people would mysteriously disappear without a trace. I laughed it off as just a local story and continued with my evening. Around midnight, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find a stranger, a woman with a pale face and wide, nervous eyes. She introduced herself as Emily and claimed she was lost while hiking. I invited her in, offering her some tea and a place to stay for the night. As we chatted, Emily seemed increasingly agitated. She kept glancing nervously out of the window and checking her watch. When I asked her what was wrong, she said she had a strange feeling that someone was watching her. I tried to reassure her, but as the night grew darker, the atmosphere in the cabin became heavy. I noticed the windows fogging up from the inside, even though it was clear and cold outside. The temperature dropped significantly, and a sense of dread settled over us. Emily's behavior became more erratic. She started muttering about how she needed to leave before it was too late. I tried to calm her down, but she rushed to the door and tried to open it. It was locked, but when I checked the lock, it was fine. She then turned to me with a terrified look. "They know you have me. They won't let me leave," she said. Confused and frightened, I tried to understand what she meant, but her eyes were wild and unseeing. She suddenly screamed and started clawing at the walls. I tried to restrain her, but she was surprisingly strong. Then, the lights flickered and went out. The cabin was plunged into darkness. I fumbled for my phone to use its flashlight, but it was dead. In the pitch-black room, I could hear Emily's frantic breathing and the sound of scratching from the walls. I managed to light a candle, and when the dim light finally illuminated the room, Emily was gone. The door was still locked, and there were no signs of forced entry or exit. The only thing left was a deep, ominous scratching on the walls that seemed to spell out, "No return." I searched the cabin and the surrounding woods, but there was no trace of Emily. The next morning, the local authorities dismissed it as a prank or a misunderstanding. However, the scratch marks on the walls remained, and every time I see them, I can't shake the feeling that something dark is still lurking, waiting for the next person who stays in the cabin. The cabin, once a symbol of my fresh start, had become a place of fear. Now, every knock on the door or strange sound makes me wonder if I'll be the next to disappear. I was excited about moving into a new house. I settled into an old rural home with a vast plot of land and a well-kept garden. The isolation and quiet were exactly what I needed to escape the chaos of city life. One evening, while I was unpacking boxes in the attic, I came across an old trunk. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, and its lock was rusted shut. Curiosity got the better of me, and I managed to pry it open. Inside, I found an assortment of old, faded photographs, a few worn-out books, and a peculiar, intricately carved wooden box. The box had no key, so I pried it open as well. Inside, there was a small, old-fashioned key and a note written in shaky handwriting. "This key unlocks the silence. Beware of what you find." I was intrigued, but also a bit unnerved. That night, I decided to explore the old cellar, which had always given me a strange feeling. I had noticed a locked door down there, which I assumed was just for storage. Using the old key, I unlocked the door. Behind it was a small, dimly lit room with an old, dusty armchair facing a wall. The room was eerily quiet, and the air was thick with dust. On the wall, there was a small, ancient-looking door with a faded inscription that read, "No escape from the silence." As I approached the chair, I noticed something odd. There was a small microphone attached to the wall. It looked old, almost like it belonged in a museum. I couldn't help but feel that the silence in the room was too perfect, too oppressive. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a high-pitched scream. It was so piercing that it felt like it was coming from inside my head. I jumped back, my heart racing. The scream seemed to echo around me, coming from every direction. I looked around frantically, but there was no one there. I tried to leave the room, but the door slammed shut behind me. The temperature dropped sharply, and the room grew colder. I could see my breath in the freezing air. The microphone began to emit a soft, static noise, and the scream continued to play on a loop. In a panic, I banged on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The screaming grew louder and more desperate, until it felt like it was closing in on me. My vision blurred, and I felt a pressure on my chest, as if the silence itself was trying to smother me. Just as I was about to collapse from fear, the door suddenly opened. I stumbled out into the cellar, gasping for breath. The room was gone, and the old key was no longer in my hand. The only evidence that something had happened was the lingering echo of the scream in my ears. The next day, I tried to find the room again, but it was as if it had never existed. The door was gone, and the key was nowhere to be found. I asked the locals about it, but they only gave me blank stares. The silence in the house has become unbearable. Every time I try to sleep, I hear the scream echoing in my dreams, a constant reminder of the terror that once was. The once serene house has become a prison of soundless horror, and I can't escape the feeling that the scream is still out there, waiting for someone else to unlock it.